My husband said it casually, as if he were reminding me to take an umbrella. Did you see the email? Your ticket to Paris is booked. You'll be traveling alone. Just a little time for yourself. I looked up from the kitchen table, my coffee already cold. Alone. The word landed strangely. We had been married for over 40 years. Trips were something we did together, even short ones, especially overseas. But his smile was calm, practiced, almost relieved. I didn't argue. At my age, you learn that some conversations reveal more when you don't push back. I nodded, folded the email printout, and told him thank you. He kissed my forehead and went upstairs to take a call. He didn't notice I hadn't finished my coffee. The morning of my departure came quickly. Too quickly. My suitcase was already by the door when I woke up, packed more efficiently than I usually managed. I assumed he had helped until I realized I didn't remember choosing half the clothes inside. The taxi arrived at exactly 9 a.m. As I stepped outside, the air cool against my face, I heard my name. Ma'am. It was Henry, our gardener. He'd worked our property for nearly 20 years, long enough to see my hair turn from chestnut to silver. He rarely spoke unless spoken to. I turned, surprised. He walked toward me quickly, wiping his hands on his worn jacket. His eyes darted toward the house, then back to me. Ma'am, he said again, lower this time. He reached out, and without thinking, I let him take my wrist. Please don't go, he whispered. Just trust me. The driver cleared his throat politely from behind me. I looked at Henry's hand on my arm. It was trembling. Henry, I said softly, what are you talking about? He shook his head, almost panicked. I shouldn't say more. Please, don't go today. At 72, you don't startle easily. You've buried parents, friends, even the version of yourself you used to be. But something in his voice made my chest tighten. I gently freed my wrist. It's all right, I said, loud enough for the driver to hear. I'll be fine. Henry stepped back, his face pale. I'm sorry, he murmured. I smiled, thanked him for his concern, and got into the taxi. As we pulled away, I looked back once. Henry was still standing there, watching the car like he was watching something disappear. 10 minutes down the road, I asked the driver to stop at the corner. I told him I'd forgotten my passport. He shrugged, used the meter, and drove off. I walked the rest of the way back through the side gate, my heart pounding louder with each step. I didn't go inside the main house. Instead, I slipped into the guest house out back, the one we rarely used except for holidays. From the small window, I could see the driveway clearly. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, my suitcase still by the front door where I'd left it. I checked my watch, 9:47 a.m. The house was quiet, too quiet. An hour passed. At 10:52 a.m., a black van turned into the driveway. It wasn't a delivery vehicle. No logo. Dark windows. It parked where the taxi had been earlier. 2 men stepped out, then a third. And when I saw who greeted them at the door, I had to put my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. I stayed perfectly still in the guest house. Through the thin curtains, I watched my home as if it belonged to someone else. The men moved with confidence, not like visitors. One of them carried a leather folder under his arm. Another spoke into his phone, pacing slowly across the driveway. My husband opened the door fully this time. He didn't look surprised. I leaned back against the wall, my knees weak, memories rising uninvited. For years, my life had grown smaller without me noticing. Not sad, not dramatic, just reduced. After retirement, my days fell into quiet routines. Morning coffee at the same kitchen table, folding laundry that wasn't really dirty yet, watching the afternoon light move across the living room rug. I told myself that was peace. My husband handled most things by then. Bills, appointments, paperwork that came in thick envelopes I no longer opened. I've got it, he always said, with a smile that sounded like care. And I believed him. Trust becomes a habit when you've practiced it for decades. I didn't need much. I wasn't extravagant. I measured my life in familiar comforts, not numbers. A warm house, a full pantry, a garden that still bloomed every spring. I never asked questions. From the guest house window, I saw one of the men gesture toward the garage. They disappeared inside together. The van door slid open again. Boxes came out. Flat ones. Long ones. Not luggage. Not gifts. Documents, maybe. I pressed my fingers into my palm to keep them from shaking. I thought back to the past year, to the small changes I'd ignored. My husband insisting we update the deed just for clarity, asking me to sign something quickly while dinner was in the oven, telling me it was routine, nothing to worry about. "You trust me, don't you?" he'd said once lightly. Of course I did. I had trusted him when he suggested I stop driving long distances. Trusted him when he said managing finances was too stressful for me now. Trusted him when he gently joked about my memory, my age, my need for rest. None of it felt cruel. That's why it worked. Outside, the men returned to the front door. One of them laughed. I couldn't hear the words, but the sound itself felt wrong. Too casual. Too comfortable. I glanced at my watch again. Noon. If I had been on that plane, I would just be boarding now, somewhere between here and the sky. Unreachable. I imagined myself sitting by the window, believing I was doing something indulgent. Something for me. The thought made my stomach turn. A door slammed. One man left, then another. The van stayed. My husband walked them out, shaking hands. When he turned back toward the house, his posture changed. Straighter, lighter, as if something heavy had finally been set down. That was when I understood. Whatever was happening wasn't sudden. It was scheduled, timed, planned around my absence. The trip wasn't a gift. It was a window. I had been living in the margins of my own life, trusting someone else to hold the center. And now, standing unseen behind thin walls, I realized how easy it is to be erased when you don't insist on being counted. I didn't cry. Tears belong to moments when hope is still negotiating. I sat down slowly on the narrow bed and listened to the sounds of my house continuing without me. Footsteps, doors, voices fading into routine, and in that quiet, something settled inside me. Not fear, clarity. The house settled into a rhythm after the van left. I could hear my husband moving from room to room, drawers opening, cabinets closing, the ordinary sounds of a normal day. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed nothing had happened at all. I stayed where I was. From the guest house, I watched the sun climb higher, warming the stone path between the buildings. Noon passed quietly. I hadn't eaten, but I wasn't hungry. My body felt suspended, like it was waiting for instructions my mind hadn't given yet. I thought about Henry, about the way his hand had trembled when he grabbed my wrist, about how he hadn't asked for anything in return. People like him don't warn you unless they're afraid of what will happen if they don't. I stood and walked slowly around the guest house. It smelled faintly of old linens and lemon cleaner. I hadn't been in here for months, maybe years. A space prepared for others, never really for me. Through the small bathroom window, I saw my husband step outside with his phone pressed to his ear. He walked toward the garden, pacing the way he always did when he wanted privacy. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. His voice was lighter than it had been in years. I remembered how we met, a lifetime ago. I had been 26, stubborn and hopeful. He had been charming, attentive, steady, the kind of man who made promises sound like facts. We built this house together, room by room, decision by decision. I had believed that history protected me. From the window, I watched him stop near the rose bushes I used to tend myself. He nodded several times, listening. Once, he laughed softly. When he hung up, he didn't come back inside right away. He stood there, hands on his hips, looking at the house like someone evaluating a finished project, satisfied. I sat back down on the bed and folded my hands in my lap. If I walked inside now, I knew what would happen. He would look startled, then concerned. He would ask why I was still here. He would suggest there had been a misunderstanding. Words like stress and confusion would appear. They always do. I had heard them before. Not directed at me, directed at other women our age. Friends whose lives had slowly been rearranged by people who claimed to love them. I never thought I would be one of them. The clock on the nightstand ticked loudly. 1 o'clock. I pulled my phone from my purse and checked my messages. Nothing. No missed calls. No concern about whether I'd boarded my flight. No check-in. That, more than anything, confirmed what I already knew. If I had truly been on that plane, I would have been unreachable. Exactly as planned. I opened my email and scrolled back through recent messages. The ticket confirmation, the hotel reservation, both booked under my name, paid for from our joint account. Clean, thoughtful, just convincing enough. A kindness with an expiration date. Outside, a car pulled into the driveway, not the van, something smaller, familiar. A woman stepped out, holding a folder to her chest. She didn't knock, she used her key. My heart slowed. Not raced. Fear had already done its job earlier. What I felt now was focus. I watched as she moved through the house like she belonged there, because in some way, she already did. I didn't know her name yet, but I would. I stayed hidden and listened to the muffled sound of voices overlapping, papers sliding across a table, chairs scraping the floor. They spoke freely. They thought I was gone. And for the first time that day, I understood the advantage of being underestimated. I wasn't ready to be seen. Not yet. She stayed for nearly 40 minutes. From the guest house, time moved differently, slower. Each sound stretched out, carrying meaning. I heard the low murmur of conversation through open windows. My husband's voice, the woman's voice, calm, professional, familiar. I didn't strain to catch words. I listened to patterns. Paper slid across a table, a chair scraped back, a drawer opened and closed. These were not the sounds of guests. They were the sounds of people handling matters that belonged to them. I leaned closer to the window. The woman emerged onto the back patio, phone in hand, pacing. She was in her late 40s, maybe early 50s. Well-dressed, comfortable shoes, not someone rushing in from an emergency, someone scheduled. She stopped near the guest house, close enough that I could see her clearly now. She spoke into her phone, nodding as she listened. "Yes," she said. "Everything's proceeding as planned." I sat back slowly, planned. When she went back inside, I finally stood. My legs felt steady, my mind even more so. I moved carefully, quietly to the small desk against the wall and opened the drawer where old stationery sat untouched. Inside was a spare notebook. I took it out and wrote the date at the top of the first page, then the time. This was not panic, this was record. I wrote down what I had seen, the van, the men, the woman with the key. I described her as accurately as I could remember. Hair, height, the folder she carried. Years ago, I would have thought this was unnecessary, excessive. But years ago, I still believed being reasonable would protect me. Outside, the back door opened again. My husband stepped out alone. He exhaled deeply, like someone finishing a long task. He loosened his collar and checked his watch. No concern, no hesitation. He walked toward the driveway and stood where the van had been earlier, looking at the empty space. Then he smiled. It was a small smile, private, satisfied. I closed the notebook and returned it to the drawer. Inside the house, the woman's voice rose slightly, then softened. A polite laugh followed, a professional one, the kind that ends conversations. A few minutes later, she left through the front door. I watched her walk to her car, unlock it, and drive away without looking back. The house fell quiet again. I waited. At 2:17 p.m., my husband called my phone. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. A minute later, a message appeared. "Just checking in. Hope your flight was smooth." I set the phone down without replying. That single sentence told me more than anything else that day. He believed distance equaled control. He believed silence meant success. I thought about answering, about pretending I was somewhere over the Atlantic, uncomfortable but compliant. But I didn't. Silence had its own language, and I was learning to speak it fluently. Instead, I moved to the guest house door and cracked it open. The main house looked the same, sunlight on the windows, curtains drawn just as I liked them, a place shaped by my choices, my years, my patience. And yet, I had never felt more like a visitor. I closed the door again and leaned against it. This was no longer about confusion, or misunderstanding, or age. This was about position. They thought I had stepped out of the picture, that my absence created space they were free to fill. What they hadn't considered was that stepping back allowed me to see the whole frame. I wasn't ready to confront anyone. Not yet. I returned to the bed and sat quietly, listening to the house breathe, to pipes settling, to floorboards creaking as my husband moved through rooms that no longer felt entirely his. I didn't feel anger. I felt prepared. And for the first time in a very long while, I was grateful I had stayed behind. The afternoon stretched on quietly after that. I remained in the guest house, moving only when I needed to. I washed my face in the small bathroom sink. I drank a glass of water slowly, standing by the window. My hands no longer shook. Whatever fear had been there earlier had already burned itself out. At 3:30 p.m., the house grew active again. I heard my husband on the phone, his voice carrying through an open window. He spoke in short, efficient sentences, not the voice he used with me. This one was precise, confident. Yes, she's already on her way. No, there shouldn't be any issues. We'll proceed as discussed. I closed my eyes. He wasn't lying loudly. He was lying smoothly. That takes practice. I thought about how many times I had defended him over the years, how often I had told friends he's just practical, or he worries too much, or he means well. Meaning well had always been enough for me. Around 4 o'clock, I heard the garage door open. A different car this time. Familiar footsteps followed. My husband returned, carrying grocery bags. He whistled softly as he walked inside. Dinner preparations. The normalcy of it almost made me laugh. He cooked that evening. Something simple. I could smell garlic and onions from the guest house. He played music while he worked, the same old playlist he always used when he was in a good mood. A man doesn't hum unless he believes things are going his way. I checked my phone again. Still no messages asking where I was. No concern about time zones or delays. Only the assumption that I was exactly where he wanted me to be. At 6:12 p.m., he texted again. Hope you're settled in. Call me when you get a chance. I turned the phone face down. The sun lowered, casting long shadows across the yard. From the guest house, I watched the windows of the main house glow one by one, lamps turned on, curtains drawn. My home prepared itself for an evening without me. I remembered the early years of our marriage, the way he used to wait up if I was late, the way he'd ask questions not because he doubted me, but because he cared. Somewhere along the way, care had been replaced by management. I had mistaken efficiency for love. At 7:40 p.m., there was a knock at the guest house door. I didn't move. The knock came again, firmer this time. Hello? My husband called. Is someone in there? My breath stayed even. My feet remained planted. After a moment, I heard him step back. His footsteps retreated toward the main house. A pause, then another door opening, closing. He hadn't expected anyone to answer. He only knocked to be sure. I sat down on the edge of the bed and let the quiet settle again. I knew now that the guest house wasn't just a hiding place. It was a margin, a place outside their assumptions. I took out the notebook once more and added a few more lines. Times, words overheard, actions that didn't match the story I'd been given. When I finished, I closed it carefully. I wasn't collecting memories. I was collecting leverage. Outside, the night deepened. Crickets filled the air. Somewhere inside the house, a television turned on. Laughter from a sitcom drifted through the yard, light and false. I lay back on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. They believed the day had gone exactly as planned, and for now, I let them keep believing that. Tomorrow would require more than silence, but tonight, silence was enough. I didn't sleep much that night. The guest house creaked as temperatures dropped, the familiar sounds of an older building settling into darkness. I lay still, listening, counting hours by the change in quiet. Midnight passed. Then 1, then 2. At 6:08 a.m., my husband's alarm went off in the main house. I sat up immediately. Through the window, I watched the kitchen light turn on. He moved through his morning routine as if nothing were different. Coffee brewed. A cabinet opened. The radio came on low, tuned to the same station he'd listened to for years. Normalcy carefully maintained. I waited. At 6:42 a.m., the back door opened. I saw him step outside with his mug, scanning the yard briefly before settling into a chair on the patio. He checked his phone, scrolling, relaxed. Still no message asking where I was. That told me more than any confession ever could. I stood and stretched slowly, grounding myself. I washed my face, brushed my hair, and put on the same clothes I'd worn the day before. I wanted to look like someone who hadn't gone anywhere. Someone who belonged exactly where she was. At 7:15 a.m., I heard Henry's truck pull in. I moved to the window just in time to see him park near the tool shed. He stepped out, hesitated, then looked toward the guest house. Our eyes met through the glass. He froze. I raised my hand slightly. He nodded once. Later that morning, while my husband took a call upstairs, Henry walked past the guest house deliberately, slowing just enough for me to open the door. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice rough. "You're still here." "Yes," I replied. "I am." He swallowed. "I hoped you would be." We didn't speak long. We didn't need to. He told me only what he knew for certain, that men had been coming by over the past few weeks, that papers were discussed when I wasn't home, that my name was mentioned like a complication, not a person. I didn't understand it all, he said, but I knew it wasn't right. I thanked him. Nothing more. By mid-morning, the house filled with movement again. My husband left briefly, then returned. Files were carried from the office to the dining table. I watched from the guest house as folders were stacked neatly, methodically. Preparation. At 11:03 a.m., the woman returned, the same one from the day before. She didn't knock this time either. They spoke inside with the windows open. I caught fragments. Timeline. Signatures. Once she settled. Settled. The word echoed in my mind. I understood then that this wasn't about anger or impatience. It was about convenience. I had become something to manage, to place neatly out of the way. They believed they were being careful. What they didn't realize was that careful people leave trails. They write things down. They assume privacy when there is only distance. I sat down and wrote again, times, words, names I didn't yet know, but would soon find. From the other house, I heard laughter, a brief one, then chairs moving, papers gathered. At 12:26 p.m., the woman left. At 12:31, my husband called my phone again. This time I let it ring twice before silencing it. I wasn't angry. I was alert. By early afternoon, the picture had sharpened. I didn't need every detail yet. I needed enough to know one thing with certainty. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a plan. And plans can be undone, quietly, by someone who knows exactly when to stop being invisible. That afternoon, after the woman left, the house settled into a quieter pattern. I stayed in the guest house, but my thoughts moved backward in time. Not out of nostalgia, out of necessity. When something carefully built begins to unravel, you look for the first loose thread. I thought about the last few years, about how decisions had gradually shifted away from me without any clear argument, how paperwork arrived already filled out, how meetings happened while I was resting, how my opinions were acknowledged, then gently set aside. It hadn't felt like exclusion. It had felt like being relieved of responsibility. I remembered the first time he suggested we simplify things. He said it was for my comfort, less stress, less to worry about. He framed it like kindness, and I had accepted it because kindness had always been our language. At my age, you don't expect betrayal to arrive loudly. You expect it to come wrapped in concern. I replayed moments I had dismissed. A conversation cut short when I entered the room. A folder quickly closed. A phone turned face down, each one insignificant on its own. Together, they formed a pattern I hadn't wanted to see. From the guest house window, I watched my husband walk across the yard, phone pressed to his ear again. He paced, nodding, occasionally smiling. He looked like a man coordinating details, not a man worried about his wife halfway to Europe. That stillness inside me deepened. I understood something then. This wasn't about removing me from his life entirely. It was about repositioning me, somewhere quieter, smaller, somewhere that required less explanation. I had seen this happen before. Friends from church, women I'd known for decades. They spoke of sudden moves, unexpected facilities, children helping out, always with paperwork already signed, always with good intentions cited as justification. I had sympathized. I had never imagined myself among them. I sat at the small table and opened my notebook again. This time, I didn't write observations. I wrote names. People who had been around more often lately. The financial advisor my husband insisted on. The attorney he said was just for estate cleanup. The woman with the key. I left space beside each name. Outside, the sound of a lawnmower started. Henry was working near the hedges, moving steadily back and forth. The ordinary rhythm grounded me. Life continuing as usual, even as something fundamental was being rearranged. I watched my husband glance toward the guest house once briefly as he crossed the yard. His gaze didn't linger. He didn't suspect anything. That told me I had time. In the early evening, I heard him inside again, opening drawers, stacking papers, preparing for something. Not a trip, not dinner, something administrative. Final. I thought about the phrase he had used so many times over the years. We'll take care of it. I realized now that we had slowly become he. I wasn't angry. Anger would have clouded what I needed most. Precision. I had lived long enough to know that outrage fades. Records remain. As night fell, I stood by the window and looked at the house I had helped build. The rooms where I had hosted holidays, raised children, cared for sick parents, held together a marriage through quiet endurance. I had not been careless with my life. I had been trusting. And trust, once broken, doesn't demand revenge. It demands correction. I closed the notebook and slipped it back into the drawer. Tomorrow, I would begin moving differently, asking different questions, making different calls. Not yet. For now, I stayed where I was, unseen, alert, and fully aware that the woman they believed had stepped away was finally paying attention. The next morning unfolded more slowly. I stayed in the guest house as the sky brightened, listening to the sounds of the property waking up. Birds in the trees, the distant hum of traffic beyond the hedges. Familiar noises that made what was happening feel unreal, like it belonged to someone else's life. At 9:10 a.m., Henry returned. I saw him through the window before he saw me. He parked his truck and stood there for a moment, hands resting on the door as if gathering courage. When he finally stepped out, he didn't head toward the tool shed right away. Instead, he walked past the guest house, deliberately slow. I opened the door. He stopped instantly. "I didn't know if you'd still be here," he said quietly. "I am," I replied. He looked relieved, then uneasy. He glanced toward the main house, then back at me. "I shouldn't talk long." "I understand." We stood there, the space between us filled with things neither of us wanted to say out loud. "I've been meaning to tell you," he began, "but I didn't know how or when." I waited. "Your husband's been meeting people here," he said. "Not every day, but often enough. Always when you weren't around, or when he thought you weren't." My hand tightened around the edge of the door frame. "There was talk," Henry continued, choosing his words carefully, "about arrangements, long-term ones, papers changing hands, names being removed and added." "Removed," I repeated. He nodded. "I heard your name more than once." I didn't interrupt him. I didn't rush him. People speak more freely when they don't feel pressed. "They asked me to witness something once," he said, "just to confirm who was present. I didn't sign anything. I told them I needed time." "Thank you," I said. He shook his head. "I don't want thanks. I just didn't want you walking into something blind." That word again, blind. I asked him only one question. "How long?" He hesitated. "Months." That answer settled heavily, but it didn't surprise me. Henry lowered his voice. "There's a lawyer involved. The woman you saw, she comes with documents ready. Everything looks official." "I know," I said. He studied my face, perhaps expecting tears or anger. When he saw neither, he relaxed slightly. "I thought you should know," he said again. "That's all." "It's enough," I replied. He nodded and stepped back, returning to his work without another word. I closed the door and sat down on the bed, letting the information find its place. Months, not days, not weeks. This had been unfolding quietly while I folded laundry, planned dinners, and trusted the rhythm of a life I thought was shared. In the main house, a door opened. I heard my husband's voice, cheerful, speaking to someone on the phone. He laughed lightly, like a man who believed his affairs were in order. I took out my notebook and turned to a clean page. This time, I wrote dates, estimated timelines. I traced the arc backward, fitting pieces together. The sudden interest in simplifying finances, the insistence on updated documents, the push for me to take a break. It aligned too neatly to be coincidence. I checked my phone. No new messages, no concern, no impatience. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt deliberately set aside. Outside, the morning continued as usual. Henry's mower started up again. A delivery truck passed by on the road. The world moved forward, indifferent to private betrayals. I closed the notebook and placed it carefully back in the drawer. The truth was no longer vague. It had weight now. Shape, direction. I wasn't guessing anymore. I knew what they were doing, and knowing changed everything. By late afternoon, the house grew quiet again. I stayed where I was, but something inside me had shifted. The uncertainty that had followed me for days was gone. In its place was a calm I hadn't felt in years, not peace. Awareness. I stopped checking the windows every few minutes, stopped listening for footsteps. There was no longer a need. I already knew what I needed to know. I made myself a simple meal in the guest house. Soup from a can, crackers on a plate. I ate slowly, deliberately, grounding myself in small, ordinary actions. This was not a retreat. It was preparation. As I washed the bowl, I caught my reflection in the small mirror above the sink. Silver hair pulled back, lines at the corners of my eyes, a face shaped by time, not weakness. I looked like a woman who had lived. That mattered. In the main house, I heard my husband moving through his evening routine, doors opening and closing, the television turning on, a laugh track spilling into the yard. He sounded comfortable. That, more than anything, confirmed the depth of his certainty. He believed the problem had been handled, that I was elsewhere, occupied, managed. I sat at the small table and opened my notebook one more time. I didn't add names or dates this time. I wrote a single sentence across the page. I am not confused. I underlined it once, then closed the notebook. At 6:45 p.m., my phone buzzed again. "Did you land yet?" He texted. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed a response. Yes, long flight. I sent it and set the phone down. The lie slid easily into place. Not because I enjoyed deception, but because I understood its value now. Silence had protected me so far. Misdirection would buy me time. Almost immediately, 3 dots appeared on the screen. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. "Glad to hear it," he replied. "Get some rest. We'll talk tomorrow." I placed the phone face down and stood. Outside, the sky darkened into evening. The lights in the main house glowed warmly. From the outside, it looked like a home at peace. I walked slowly around the guest house, touching the walls, the doorframe, the small dresser. This place had gone unnoticed for years, overlooked, dismissed as extra space. It suited me. I lay down on the bed and closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to think, to organize what came next. I didn't rush it. Rash decisions belonged to people who hadn't learned patience the hard way. I thought about the calls I would make, the documents I would request, the questions I would ask without revealing how much I already knew. I thought about timing. When you've lived long enough, you understand that truth doesn't need to arrive loudly. It only needs to arrive intact. From the main house, my husband turned off the television. Footsteps moved upstairs. A bedroom door closed. The house settled into night. I lay still, breathing evenly, listening to the silence deepen. I wasn't afraid of it anymore. Silence was no longer empty. It was full of intention. They believed I was resting in a hotel room across the ocean. In reality, I was closer than ever. And for the first time since this began, I didn't feel behind. I felt ahead. The following morning, I woke before dawn, not because of noise, because my mind had already moved ahead of the day. I sat up slowly, listening to the quiet, then reached for my phone. No new messages, no questions, no urgency. That was my advantage. I dressed carefully, choosing neutral clothes, nothing that suggested travel or disruption. I wanted to look exactly like someone who had never left. Someone whose presence could be explained away if necessary. At 7:20 a.m., my husband left the house. I watched from the guest house window as he backed out of the driveway, briefcase in hand. He didn't look toward the guest house. He never did. To him, it was empty space. The moment his car disappeared down the road, I moved. I entered the main house through the back door, the way I had thousands of times before. The air smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner. Everything was in its place, too much in its place. I went straight to the office. The filing cabinets were locked. That was new. I noted it without reacting. I checked the desk drawers next. The top one held only pens and old receipts. The second was empty. The third drawer opened with resistance. Inside were folders stacked neatly, labeled in his handwriting. Estate, medical, property. I didn't take anything. I photographed each label, each folder edge, carefully, quietly. I returned the drawer to its exact position. In the dining room, papers still sat where I'd seen them the day before. He hadn't bothered to move everything. He didn't think he needed to. I photographed those too. I didn't rush. Rushing leaves mistakes. At 8:05 a.m., I heard Henry's mower in the distance. The sound steadied me. Time was still moving normally. That mattered. I went upstairs. Our bedroom looked untouched. The bed made tightly. His clothes laid out for the next day. I opened the closet and checked the shelf where we kept important documents years ago. Empty. That told me something had already been relocated. I moved to the guest room down the hall, the one used for storage now. Boxes lined the walls, labeled and stacked. I opened one at random. Inside were old photo albums. Another box held tax records from years ago, organized, curated. I photographed the labels again. At 9:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. "Just finished breakfast," he texted. "Hope you slept well." I waited a full minute before replying. "Still adjusting," I wrote. That was true enough. I returned to the office and sat in the chair, hands folded, breathing evenly. I wasn't looking for proof of betrayal anymore. I was mapping structure, understanding flow, who handled what, when, where things moved when I wasn't watching. At 9:30, I made my first call, not to confront, not to accuse, to ask a question I was entitled to ask. My voice was calm, curious, unremarkable. I didn't mention travel. I didn't mention concern. I asked for clarification on a document I couldn't find. The answer came easily, too easily. That confirmed what I suspected. By mid-morning, I had enough to stop, enough to know where the lines were drawn and where they could be crossed without raising alarms. I returned everything exactly as I found it. No drawers left ajar, no boxes shifted. The house returned to its staged calm. Before leaving the main house, I stood in the doorway of the office and looked around one last time. It didn't feel hostile. It felt incomplete, like a story told without its ending. I walked back to the guest house and closed the door behind me. This wasn't about catching someone in the act. It was about understanding the mechanism well enough to dismantle it quietly. They believed I was out of reach. In reality, I was already inside the system they thought they controlled, and I was done observing. The next phase would require precision. I waited until early evening. By then, the house had settled into its familiar rhythm again. The time of day when everything slowed, when routines took over and people stopped expecting surprises. At 6:18 p.m., my husband's car pulled into the driveway. I stayed where I was until I heard the front door close. Then I stepped out of the guest house. I didn't rush. I walked across the yard at a steady pace, the gravel crunching softly under my shoes. The air smelled like cut grass and dinner cooking. Ordinary, predictable. I entered through the back door. He was in the kitchen, loosening his tie, reading something on his phone. He looked up when he heard me. For half a second, his face went blank. Not shock, not fear. Calculation. "You're back early," he said. I smiled slightly. "Earlier than planned." He recovered quickly. He always did. "Everything all right? I thought you were still adjusting." "I am," I replied, setting my purse down. "Just not the way you expected." He nodded once, slowly, as if processing new information. He didn't ask how I'd gotten home. He didn't ask why he hadn't heard from me. He didn't ask where my luggage was. Those questions would have complicated the story he had been telling himself. We stood there for a moment, the space between us filled with unspoken calculations. "I was just about to start dinner," he said finally. "I'm not hungry," I said. "I just needed something." He waited. "I need to look at a few things," I continued calmly. "Some papers. I couldn't find them earlier." His eyes flicked toward the hallway. "Just once." "I can help you with that," he said. "I know," I replied, "but I'd like to see them myself." There it was, the smallest hesitation, barely visible, but after everything I had seen, it might as well have been a confession. "I'm tired," he said lightly. "We can do it another day." "No," I said. "Today is fine." Silence stretched between us. He studied my face, searching for confusion, for doubt, for softness. He didn't find it. "All right," he said at last, "if you insist." He led the way to the office. I followed. Inside, he opened drawers, pulling out folders with practiced ease. He placed them on the desk one by one, explaining as he went. His voice was calm, reasonable, familiar. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I watched his hands. When he finished, he looked up at me expectantly. "That's everything," he said. I nodded. "Thank you." I picked up one folder and flipped through it slowly. I didn't comment. I didn't accuse. I didn't react. Then I closed it and set it back down. "There's one missing," I said. His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "The one you moved last week," I replied. "The one that wasn't ready yet." He didn't answer right away. That pause told me everything. "I'll get it later," he said. "It's nothing important." "It is to me," I replied. He sighed, a hint of irritation slipping through. "You're tired. Let's not do this now." I looked at him steadily. "I'm not confused and I'm not tired in the way you think." The room went very still. He leaned back slightly, reassessing. The dynamic had shifted. He could feel it. "I just want transparency," I continued. "Nothing more." He forced a smile. "Of course." But his hands had tightened. I didn't press further. Not yet. I gathered my purse and turned toward the door. "I'm going to rest," I said. "We'll continue another time." He nodded, relief flickering briefly across his face. As I walked back toward the guest house, I felt it clearly then. The balance had changed. He knew I was no longer where he had placed me. And now, so did I. This wasn't the end. It was the moment he realized I was still standing in the room. The house felt different after that. Not quieter, not louder, just honest. I spent that night in the guest house, not because I was hiding anymore, but because I chose to. Choice changes the meaning of space. What had once been a margin had become my ground. The next morning, I woke with the sun. No urgency, no dread. I dressed carefully and walked into the main house without hesitation. My husband was already in the kitchen, standing at the counter with his coffee. He looked up as I entered. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied. We moved around each other easily, like people who had lived together for decades. The difference was subtle, but it mattered. I was no longer waiting for cues. I poured my own coffee. I sat where I wanted. He watched me more than he realized. After breakfast, I gathered my purse. "I have an appointment this afternoon," I said. "With whom?" he asked. I met his eyes. "Someone who works for me." That was all. I left the house and drove myself. No explanation, no itinerary offered. For years, I had allowed transparency to move in only one direction. That had ended. The appointment was brief, professional, quiet. I listened more than I spoke. I didn't dramatize. I didn't accuse. I laid out facts, timelines, documents. I asked for clarity. I received it. By the time I returned home, the path forward was no longer abstract. It was structured, measured, lawful. When I walked back inside, my husband was in the living room, phone in hand. He looked up quickly. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Very." That evening, we sat across from each other at the dining table. Papers lay neatly between us, not scattered, not hidden, simply present. I spoke first. "I've reviewed everything," I said, "not just what you showed me." His jaw tightened. "I'm not here to argue," I continued, "and I'm not here to negotiate my place in a life I helped build." He started to speak. I raised my hand slightly. "I know what was planned," I said. "I know who was involved, and I know what assumptions were made about me." Silence filled the room. "I won't raise my voice," I went on, "and I won't shame you, but I won't be managed." He looked at me then, not with calculation, but with something closer to recognition. "This ends now," I said, quietly, cleanly, with dignity, "or it becomes something else." He nodded once. That was enough. The following weeks unfolded without drama. Adjustments were made, documents corrected, boundaries redrawn, not because of threats, but because the truth had been placed firmly back where it belonged. I stayed in the house, so did he. But things were different, not repaired, rebalanced. Henry continued his work, steady as ever. One afternoon, I thanked him again. He nodded, uncomfortable with praise, and returned to trimming the hedges. Loyalty doesn't ask for recognition. It just shows up when it matters. One morning, as I stood in the garden, I thought about the plane I never boarded, the trip that was meant to remove me quietly from my own life. I smiled. I hadn't needed to go anywhere to find myself again. I had needed to stay. At this age, people assume your strength has softened, that you're tired, that you'll choose comfort over clarity. They are wrong. Experience doesn't dull you, it sharpens you. I didn't win anything. I reclaimed what was already mine, my voice, my footing, my place in the story. And the most important thing I learned wasn't about betrayal. It was about presence. When you stop disappearing to make others comfortable, everything changes. They thought I was gone. That was their mistake.